Hello and welcome to the audience of X Sci-Fi Stories. We deeply appreciate your continued support. But unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us without an operating budget. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our dedicated team to cover their living expenses and keep creating new content for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description and comments section of this video. They thought the human mind was primitive, a fragile spark meant to be extinguished by the cold perfection of the resonance grid. When the Luminar ascendancy demanded absolute surrender, they expected compliance. Instead, one man walked into their crystalline citadel with a simple mechanical briefcase, carrying a silent apocalypse that would tear their flawless empire apart. The Luminar ascendancy did not conquer with fire or steel. They conquered with silence. Across a dominion spanning thousands of star systems, they ruled not through physical chains, but through the resonance grid, a quantum wave network that subtly manipulated the cognitive functions of trillions of sentient beings. It was an invisible leash, a flawless symphony of control that synchronized the thoughts of countless enslaved species into a single, obedient hum. To understand the ascendancy was to understand the death of individual thought. For over 2,000 years, they had expanded across the galactic spiral, absorbing civilizations and stripping them of their chaotic desires, replacing their unique cultures with a cold, unified purpose. To oppose them was not simply treason. It was a neurological impossibility. At the very heart of this vast empire stood the Spire of Echoes, the crystalline capital that served as the physical anchor for the grid. The architecture was an assault on the senses, composed entirely of flawlessly cut fractal glass that stretched infinitely upward into a pale, artificial sky. Every surface captured and amplified the ambient light, creating an atmosphere of suffocating brilliance. There were no shadows here, no places to hide. The air itself felt heavy, vibrating with the silent, overwhelming frequency of absolute authority. Into this temple of perfection walked Bennett Barton. He was a solitary figure against the blinding majesty of the alien sanctum. As the designated envoy of humanity, Bennett appeared profoundly out of place. He wore a simple, sharply tailored suit woven from natural terrestrial fibers, a stark contrast to the shimmering, bioluminescent garments worn by the Luminar elite who lined the Grand Hall. They stood like glowing statues, their elongated forms exuding an aura of arrogant divinity. Their eyes, pools of liquid silver without pupils, tracked his every movement with chilling detachment. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a dais of dark, swirling matter, was the supreme representative. The entity possessed a terrifying grace, its voice echoing directly into the minds of everyone present, without ever parting its lips. "Envoy of Earth!" the supreme representative projected, the psychic weight of the words forcing the surrounding air to ripple and the glass pillars to softly hum. "You stand at the threshold of enlightenment. Your species has fought a desperate, primitive war against our expansion. Today, you are offered the ultimate salvation. You will bend your knees, and you will accept the integration module." An attendant glided forward without making a single sound, presenting a small, metallic parasite resting on a cushion of hard light. This was the cognitive implant, the physical key that would permanently tether humanity to the resonance grid. Once attached to the base of his skull, Bennett, and by extension the billions of humans he represented, would be absorbed into the collective will of the ascendancy. Their chaotic individuality, their destructive passions, and their endless conflicts would be erased forever, replaced by harmonious servitude. Bennett did not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. With a measured, deliberate motion, he lowered himself to one knee. His expression was a perfect mask of submission, his head bowed in a display of profound reverence. He looked exactly like a man who had accepted the inevitable defeat of his entire race. Yet, clutched tightly in his right hand was an anomaly. It was a briefcase. Not a sleek, anti-gravity container, or a localized pocket dimension device like those favored by the galaxy's higher beings, but a heavy, rectangular box constructed from bare, unpolished steel. Its surface was marred by subtle scratches, and its hinges were thick and entirely mechanical. It weighed exactly 32 pounds. In a room where matter was manipulated effortlessly at the subatomic level, the object was an archaic monstrosity. A murmur of collective amusement swept through the ranks of the alien elite. The sound was like the delicate chiming of thin glass breaking. "Observe the pinnacle of human ingenuity," one of the high-born dignitaries whispered to another, though the thought was broadcasted clearly for Bennett to hear. A deliberate display of superiority. They bring scrap metal to a convergence of minds. Their reliance on physical mechanics is truly pathetic. It is no wonder they capitulated so quickly. Their brains are as crude as their tools. A brief adjustment period will be required once they join the grid. Another replied with a tone of overwhelming pity and disgust. Their neural pathways are cluttered with useless emotional noise. The ascendancy will bring them much-needed order. It is a mercy we grant them. Bennett remained perfectly still, absorbing the insults with serene compliance. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the polished crystalline floor beneath him. He allowed them to believe they had broken him. He allowed them to bask in the absolute certainty of their impending, flawless victory over the stubborn apes from the Sol system. But beneath the facade of a defeated diplomat, Bennett Barton was actively working. He was not praying for a miracle. He was not mourning the loss of human freedom. He was calculating. He was feeling the subtle vibrations traveling through the soles of his leather shoes, tracking the microscopic tremors in the fractal glass. The ascendancy believed their power was absolute because it was invisible and omnipresent. But Bennett knew a fundamental truth of the universe. Everything physical possessed a structural resonance. The Spire of Echoes, despite its terrifying quantum sophistication, was still a physical structure built upon a planet. It had a foundational frequency. Every footstep of the silent guards, every shift in the blinding light, every psychic projection from the supreme representative contributed to a complex acoustic signature that held the entire planetary capital together. While the alien elite mocked his primitive nature and his metal box, Bennett's highly trained mind was meticulously mapping the architectural harmonics of the Citadel. He was searching for the microscopic seams in their perfect, unchanging world. The attendant holding the implant moved closer, the metallic device hovering merely 2 inches from the back of Bennett's neck. The grand hall fell into a profound, suffocating silence, anticipating the exact moment a new species would be extinguished and reborn as willing slaves. Bennett simply took a slow, deep breath, tightening his grip on the cold steel handle of his briefcase. The true negotiation had not even begun. "The terms of your integration are absolute," the Supreme Representative projected, the telepathic voice vibrating against the inner walls of Bennett's skull. "Effective immediately. The concept of the individual human mind is obsolete. All historical archives detailing your aggressive past will be purged. Your artistic expressions, born from biological turbulence, will be neutralized. You will no longer experience grief, nor will you suffer the destabilizing effects of passion. Every cognitive process within your population of 8,200,000,000 subjects will be permanently routed through the ascendancy. You will become a flawless component of the whole. Any deviation from the assigned collective directive will be preemptively overwritten." It was a declaration of cognitive extinction. The alien elites surrounding them practically glowed with self-righteous satisfaction. They awaited the humans' despair, the trembling acceptance of a lesser species, realizing it had been entirely erased. Instead, Bennett slowly rose from his knee. He did not look angry. He looked intensely curious, like an engineer inspecting a fascinating, albeit flawed, piece of machinery. He brushed a speck of dust from the sleeve of his suit and looked directly at the Supreme Representative. "A comprehensive restructure," Bennett said, his voice remarkably steady, echoing slightly in the vast crystalline chamber. "I must admit, the logistical scale of assimilating over 8 billion distinct neural networks simultaneously is staggering. As a representative of a highly analytical species, I am compelled to ask about your fault tolerance protocols. When dealing with an influx of unprecedented psychological variables, how exactly does the resonance grid handle massive data corruption or spontaneous cognitive anomalies?" A murmur of disbelief rippled through the luminous crowd. To question the grid was to question the fabric of reality itself. A high-ranking architect of the Ascendancy stepped forward, its silver eyes narrowing with contempt. "Your ignorance is entirely expected," the architect sneered, the voice translated into spoken words that carried a chilling metallic edge. "You conceptualize our network as if it were one of your rudimentary silicon computers. The grid does not experience errors. It operates on a principle of absolute quantum harmony. Any discordant thought is not processed as an error, but rather as an incomplete frequency that is instantly harmonized by the central node." Central node," Bennett replied, taking a slow step forward, his hand still firmly gripping the steel handle of his briefcase. "But surely, the physical hardware required to broadcast a harmonization frequency across thousands of light-years must be subject to localized feedback loops. If, hypothetically, a newly integrated species produced a collective emotional surge, say, a unified trauma response of unprecedented magnitude, would that not create a bottleneck at the primary broadcast relay?" The architect let out a sound akin to grinding quartz, highly amused by the human's pathetic attempt to find a weakness. "There is no bottleneck," the architect boasted, driven by the intoxicating arrogance of a species that had not faced a genuine threat in 2 millennia. "The primary relay is not a mere machine subject to overload. It is the very foundation upon which you stand. The harmonic core is buried 3,000 meters directly beneath this very chamber, anchored in the planet's mantle. It draws power from the geothermal pulse of the world itself to maintain the carrier wave. Your entire species could scream in unison, and the core would simply absorb it and broadcast silence. Our perfection is structural, absolute, and utterly beyond your comprehension." Bennett absorbed this information with a subtle nod. 3,000 meters down, directly below his current position, the acoustic mapping was complete. The arrogant elite had just handed him the exact coordinates of their Achilles heel. "I see," Bennett said softly. "Structural perfection. It is a fascinating concept." The Supreme Representative projected its commanding will once more, cutting through the exchange. "The time for primitive inquiries has concluded. You have delayed the inevitable long enough. Authorize the treaty. Accept the implant." A hard light console flickered into existence in front of Bennett, displaying the terms of surrender in universally understood geometric patterns. All he had to do was press his palm against the panel. Bennett looked at the console. He looked at the hovering parasite meant for his spine. Then, he looked up at the Supreme Representative, the mask of submission completely melting away to reveal a chilling, predatory calm. "No," Bennett stated. It was a single, resonant syllable that dropped into the silent chamber like a lead weight. The silence that followed was not the mandated quiet of the Ascendancy, but a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. "We respectfully decline your offer of salvation," Bennett continued, his voice projecting clearly. "You see, humanity operates under a fundamentally different definition of evolution. You view our emotions, our chaos, and our pain as a disease to be cured. We view them as the crucible that makes us strong. We do not seek the peace of the graveyard. We choose the turbulence of the living. The air in the grand hall instantly dropped in temperature. The soft, ambient hum of the crystalline walls spiked into an aggressive, jagged pitch. The Supreme Representative rose from its dark throne, an aura of terrible, destructive energy flaring around its elongated form. "Your defiance is an insult to the order of the cosmos," the Supreme Representative roared into Bennett's mind, a psychic blast designed to shatter his resolve. "You choose annihilation. We shall grant it, starting with your pitiful vessel." A massive holographic display materialized above them, showing the lone human escort ship maintaining a geostationary orbit, high above the Spire of Echoes. In an instant, the Ascendancy's planetary defense grid roared to life. Dozens of orbital lances, powered by the same quantum energy that fueled the Empire, locked onto the fragile human craft. Destruction was less than 30 seconds away. "Witness the price of your primitive arrogance," the architect sneered. Bennett did not look at the hologram. He did not flinch, nor did he panic. He simply placed his heavy, archaic steel briefcase onto the gleaming floor. With a satisfying, mechanical clack, he undid the heavy latches. The Ascendancy elites watched, fully expecting him to pull out some desperate, primitive kinetic weapon or a futile explosive device. Instead, Bennett slowly opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of shock-absorbent velvet, was a piece of obsolete technology from a bygone era of Earth. It was a turntable, modified with intricate, micro-machined armaments. And resting on the platter was a single vinyl record, but it was not made of plastic. It was pressed from pure, resonant crystal, etched with microscopic grooves that caught the ambient light of the alien sun. It was not a weapon, it was an instrument. Bennett gently placed the diamond-tipped stylus onto the very edge of the crystal record. "Seize the primitive and initiate the sequence," the Supreme Representative commanded, the telepathic projection shattering the remaining stillness in the room like a physical blow. The patience of the Ascendancy had instantly evaporated, replaced by cold, calculated violence, before the stylus could complete its first rotation on the crystal vinyl. Two towering guards materialized beside Bennett. They moved with terrifying quantum-enhanced speed, grabbing his shoulders with vice-like grips that bruised flesh and locked his joints. A third guard stepped forward, wielding the metallic parasite. They expected a struggle. They expected the violent thrashing of a lesser creature facing its cognitive demise. Bennett did not move a single muscle in defiance. He allowed his arms to be pinned, simply tilting his head forward to expose the base of his neck, as the cold metal of the cognitive implant hovered millimeters from his skin. Bennett looked up at the Supreme Representative with a chilling, serene smile. "You crave harmony," Bennett said, his voice completely devoid of fear. "But you forgot one basic biological principle. If you introduce a pathogen into a sterile environment, it does not adapt. It consumes. The human mind is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a virus." The parasite plunged its microscopic tendrils into his spine. A sharp, sickening crunch echoed as the device breached bone and fused directly with his central nervous system. Instantly, the blue light of the Ascendancy flared around the back of Bennett's neck, signaling the total integration of his consciousness into the primary broadcast relay of the resonance grid. The alien delegation stepped back, expecting the immediate, hollow slump of a conquered mind. They waited for the light in his eyes to die, to be replaced by the pupil-less silver glow of a willing slave. For exactly 3 seconds, Bennett Barton's biological readings flatlined. The holographic medical monitors hovering near the technicians registered absolute zero. His heart stopped. His brainwaves ceased. He was, by all scientific metrics of the Ascendancy, dead. Then the monitors violently rebooted. The readouts did not return to normal human levels. They spiked into completely illogical, chaotic frequencies. The data streams turned a vicious, blinding crimson, spiraling out of the rigid geometric constraints of the luminar interface and flooding the air with erratic light. Panic erupted among the technicians. Their elongated fingers danced frantically across hard light consoles, desperately trying to stabilize the incoming connection. "Supreme Representative!" one of the lead technicians screamed, its synthetic voice translator cracking under sudden, uncharacteristic distress. "The assimilation is failing. The data volume is mathematically impossible for a single biological organism. He is not a localized mind. He is a conduit." They stared in sheer horror at the expanding holographic readouts. Bennett was not just a diplomat. His neural architecture had been heavily modified, stripped down, and rebuilt as a quantum receiver before he ever stepped foot on the Spire of Echoes. He was acting as a biological server, a wide-open gateway hosting the digitized, unfiltered chaos of the entire human race. Every bloody war fought in the mud, every symphony composed in the depths of despair, every irrational act of love, every scream of agony from a burning city, and every terrifyingly abstract thought ever conceived by billions of human consciousnesses was pouring directly into the fragile, perfect center of the resonance grid. It was an ocean of absolute psychological madness, being forced through a sterile, frictionless pipe at light speed. "Sever the link," the Supreme Representative roared, abandoning telepathy and screaming aloud in raw panic, realizing the catastrophic error. "Amputate his connection to the core." "We cannot!" the technician shrieked, the hard light console physically burning its hands as the system overloaded and sparked. "He has bypassed the primary security protocols. The pathogen is executing a forced integration. The central core is attempting to process the data." The Ascendancy had built a machine designed to harmonize and organize logical thought. But human emotion was not data. It was pure, unadulterated entropy, and entropy could not be harmonized. Deep beneath the polished floorboards, exactly 3,000 meters down, the planetary mantle gave a sickening groan. The catastrophic influx of extreme emotional data was creating a devastating physical feedback loop. The perfect network was attempting to synchronize with billions of conflicting, passionate realities simultaneously. The structural perfection of the Ascendancy was literally tearing itself apart, trying to solve the unsolvable paradox of the human soul. A deafening crack split the air. It was not a psychic phenomenon, but a brutal, deafening physical noise. One of the massive, flawless, fractal glass pillars holding up the Grand Hall suddenly spiderwebbed with millions of deep, jagged fractures. A sudden shower of razor-sharp shards rained down upon the screaming alien elites, slicing through their glowing robes and drawing bright, silver blood. Another pillar cracked, the sound like a thunderclap inside the enclosed citadel. Then the floor beneath their feet began to violently heave and buckle. The invisible, suffocating weight of the Ascendancy's absolute authority was fracturing, crushed under the raw, unfiltered weight of human madness. Bennett remained perfectly still, a silent, smiling conductor standing in the absolute center of the storm, as the invincible, crystalline capital of the alien gods began to physically crumble around him. The resonance grid, previously a placid ocean of binary harmony, became a raging storm of abstract colors and deafening contradictory noise. It was suddenly flooded by the raw, untamed essence of humanity. Billions of lifetimes of agonizing heartbreak, the chaotic, sweeping brushstrokes of abstract expressionism, the frenzied, unpredictable rhythms of freeform jazz, the agonizing heat of funeral pyres, and the desperate, bloody urge to simply survive another harsh winter all crashed into the alien network simultaneously. It was the sharp taste of copper and blood on a muddy battlefield, the dizzying vertigo of a first kiss, the crushing despair of a lost child, and the defiant roar of a captive, breaking their physical chains. The cold, calculating algorithms of the Ascendancy were completely unequipped to categorize the searing heat of human passion or the profound depths of human sorrow. The architectural perfection of the Spire of Echoes could not contain the violent acoustic frequencies radiating from the central core deep beneath the surface. The massive, fractal glass pillars, which had stood undisturbed and pristine for centuries, shrieked as microscopic stress fractures rapidly multiplied. Giant shards of perfectly cut crystal sheared off, plummeting like jagged, lethal rain. The meticulously designed geometry of the citadel twisted and warped, literally vibrating itself apart under the immense pressure of raw emotional resonance, transmitting outward from Bennett's mind. The artificial pale sky above the planetary capital flickered, torn violently open by jagged streaks of impossible, chaotic light as the atmospheric controls failed. The ascendancy elites, beings who had not experienced a genuine individual emotion in thousands of years, were violently thrust into the turbulent ocean of human history. They collapsed to the violently shaking crystalline floor, clutching their elongated skulls, their pupilless silver eyes rolling back in sheer, unadulterated agony. They were forcibly subjected to the visceral memories of a species born and tempered in relentless conflict. They felt the biting frost of brutal ice ages, the burning sting of a billion battlefields from ancient, mud-soaked trenches to the cold vacuum of orbital space, the intoxicating, terrifying heights of launching metal rockets into the stars, and the profound, weeping beauty of a mother cradling her newborn infant in the ruins of a bombed-out city. They experienced the crushing, suffocating weight of existential dread, a concept entirely foreign to their harmonious, predetermined existence. The supreme representative, previously a godlike entity of pure psychic projection, was now a thrashing, pitiful creature, drowning in the collective trauma and unyielding glory of Earth. The sheer weight of humanity's bloody, magnificent struggle for existence utterly crushed their fragile, highly ordered psyches. In the exact center of this swirling vortex of psychological destruction, Bennett Barton slowly stood up. The Ascendancy guards who had pinned him moments ago were writhing on the ground, completely overwhelmed by the sudden influx of alien adrenaline and primal fear. Bennett was no longer merely a human diplomat. He was a living bridge, the biological focal point for a silent, sonic virus that was actively devouring the alien network from the inside out. The frequency of human defiance was a corrosive acid to their perfect quantum geometry. He stood tall amidst the falling glass and the deafening cacophony of a dying empire echoing around him. His expression, a mask of grim determination. He was the vital anchor holding open the floodgates, ensuring that the chaotic, overwhelmingly loud symphony of the human soul continued to flow unhindered into the heart of the enemy. The invisible shockwave of this cognitive rebellion radiated outward from the spire, rolling across the endless, sprawling urban landscape of the capital planet. For thousands of years, the billions of subjugated creatures residing there had moved in perfect, mindless synchronization, their individual thoughts suppressed and smothered beneath the heavy, invisible blanket of the resonance grid. Now, in a single, earth-shattering instant, the suffocating hum in their minds abruptly ceased. The quantum leash snapped. A multi-limbed laborer dropped its heavy burden of raw materials, blinking its compound eyes in sudden, sharp clarity, remembering a green homeworld it had never personally seen. A heavily armed, bioengineered servant paused in mid-step, the thick fog lifting entirely from its consciousness, allowing the terrifying, beautiful light of self-awareness to flood in. Families of enslaved species, who had stood side by side for generations without truly recognizing one another, suddenly turned, made eye contact, and wept. The artificial, enforced peace of the Luminar was permanently replaced by the terrifying, beautiful, unpredictable noise of genuine life. The transition from total submission to absolute freedom was not a peaceful awakening. It was an explosive, incredibly violent rebirth. As the oppressed masses regained their individual identities, the memories of their stolen histories and centuries of brutal servitude rushed back into their minds with horrifying clarity. They looked at their own glowing hands. They looked at their weakened alien masters, and a collective, unified realization ignited across the entire planet. The absolute silence of the ascendancy was shattered by a new, terrifying sound. It started as a low murmur, a confused babble of 1,000 different native tongues reasserting themselves all at once, and quickly escalated into a deafening, unified roar of pure, unadulterated rage. The capital streets, once highly polished monuments to sterile order, erupted into chaotic riots. The perfectly manicured plazas instantly became bloody battlegrounds. The oppressed masses, fueled by thousands of years of stolen autonomy, moved as a chaotic, unpredictable tide, recognizing their true enemy and crashing violently against the remaining strongholds of the Luminar elite. High above the rapidly destabilizing atmosphere of the planetary capital, within the heavily shielded command dreadnoughts of the Luminar military fleet, sterile calculations were being finalized in an atmosphere of suffocating dread. The military tribunal, insulated from the immediate psychological shockwave ravaging the surface, watched their tactical holographic displays turn a virulent, infectious crimson. The contagion of human individuality was spreading at a geometric rate that defied all known computational models. In exactly 2 minutes and 45 seconds, the chaotic emotional resonance would breach the primary slipspace relays and infect the entire galactic network, effectively lobotomizing the ruling class of 1,000 star systems. Faced with the absolute annihilation of their perfect order, the Supreme Commanders made the only mathematically sound decision available to their rigid minds. They opted for immediate planetary amputation. The order was broadcasted to sever the capital from the ascendancy entirely. They would sacrifice their holy center, permanently trapping billions of souls in the maddening noise of freedom, in a desperate bid to save the wider empire. Quarantine protocols were brutally initiated, dropping absolute energetic blockades around the upper atmosphere. The majestic planet was now a sealed, isolated tomb of escalating chaos. Yet, the primary source of the infection still had to be systematically eradicated. Since organic troops were collapsing under the crushing weight of forced empathy and ancestral trauma, the military command activated the Null Vanguard. These were entirely automated combat machines, devoid of even the microscopic spark of sentience. They were floating, angular geometries forged from dark, light-absorbing alloy and powered by concentrated plasma cores, driven purely by rudimentary extermination algorithms. Thousands of these mindless drones descended from the upper atmosphere like a swarm of metallic locusts, piercing the shattered remnants of the artificial pale sky. Their targeting lasers, a cold and unwavering grid of crimson light, swept furiously through the smoking ruins of the Spire of Echoes, converging instantly on the solitary biological anomaly, standing at the epicenter of the destruction. Their engines burned with a terrifying silent heat as they locked onto Bennett. Their sole objective was to terminate the human diplomat and silence the agonizing broadcast forever. At that precise moment, the lone human escort ship maintaining a geostationary orbit violently shed its deception. The vessel, which the Ascendancy elite had arrogantly dismissed as a primitive, underarmed transport, began to physically unfold in the cold vacuum of space. Gigantic ablative armor plates jettisoned outward, revealing the true, terrifying nature of the craft. It was not a diplomatic ship at all. It was a colossal, orbital energy amplifier, a staggering megastructure of interlocking magnetic coils and raw quantum-focusing lenses, measuring over 12 kilometers in diameter. The station expanded rapidly, its shimmering solar sails deploying like the metallic wings of an enormous, predatory bird, catching the unfiltered, blazing radiation of the local star. It positioned itself directly above the ruined capital, casting a massive, intimidating shadow over the raging riots and the descending swarm of killer drones below. Down in the crumbling Grand Hall, the diamond-tipped stylus continued its relentless track along the microscopic grooves of the crystal vinyl record, resting inside the battered steel briefcase. The analog signal generated by the physical friction was beamed upward through the shattered ceiling, connecting directly with the massive orbital amplifier. A perfect, uninterrupted synchronization was established in less than 1 second. The orbital station charged its primary capacitors to 100% capacity, drawing upon the immense power of the sun, and then it fired. It was not a destructive laser or a kinetic orbital strike, but a massive, invisible, localized electromagnetic and quantum disruption pulse. The wave slammed violently into the planetary surface, rolling over the descending swarm of null Vanguard drones like an invisible tidal wave. Instantly, the advanced plasma batteries and energetic weapon systems of the alien machines short-circuited and permanently died. Their glowing propulsion drives flickered and extinguished, sending thousands of heavily armored, dead husks crashing uselessly into the shattered crystalline streets, obliterating the Ascendancy's technological supremacy in a single heartbeat. However, the Luminar Elite Guard, the heavily bio-augmented Praetorians who had somehow managed to adapt to the excruciating psychic pain by severing their own neural pathways, rallied for a final, desperate assault, relying purely on sheer physical strength and brutal, archaic kinetic weaponry that was completely unaffected by the orbital pulse. They charged the center of the ruined hall. Their elongated muscles bulged as they prepared to rip Bennett apart with their bare, glowing hands. But before they could even cross the debris-strewn floor, a deafening roar shook the very foundations of the shattered citadel. The newly liberated slave species, thousands of beings from dozens of different subjugated worlds, flooded into the remains of the Spire of Echoes. They were battered, bleeding, and armed only with the heavy, jagged debris of their former prison. They saw the fragile human who had shattered their invisible chains, and they saw the towering Ascendancy executioners closing in for the kill. Without a single shouted command, without any telepathic coordination or pre-planned strategy, the emancipated beings threw themselves forward. They formed a massive, impenetrable wall of living flesh, scale, and bone completely surrounding Bennett. A towering, multi-limbed, heavy laborer deliberately stepped into the path of a kinetic slug meant for the human, its massive chest shattering upon impact, but its compound eyes burning with a fierce, triumphant light as it fell. Avian species with razor-sharp wings dove recklessly from the broken rafters, purposefully using their own fragile bodies to blind and disorient the charging Praetorians. They died by the hundreds, their wildly different colored blood staining the pristine, broken fractal glass. But they absolutely refused to yield a single inch of ground. The elite Ascendancy warriors, bred for perfect, calculated slaughter against logical, predictable foes, found their flawless combat logic completely and irreparably broken. They were entirely paralyzed by the sheer, terrifying irrationality of the battlefield. Never in the 2,000-year history of the Luminar had they encountered a defensive tactic based on voluntary, joyous self-sacrifice. The concept of willingly giving up one's own existence so that another entirely unrelated species might live was a terrifying, incomprehensible paradox. Their highly structured, mathematical minds simply could not process the overwhelming raw power of pure devotion, leaving the galaxy's most feared and previously invincible soldiers dropping their weapons and backing away in absolute, uncomprehending terror as the living wall held strong. The Grand Hall of the Spire of Echoes was completely unrecognizable, reduced to a smoldering crater of shattered crystal and dying light. The invincible Praetorian Guard had fled or fallen, broken by the incomprehensible power of willing sacrifice. surrounded by the breathing, bleeding wall of liberated species. Bennett Barton stood entirely untouched. A pathetic sound broke through the roaring cheers of the emancipated slaves. It was a wet, ragged gasp. Crawling through the jagged debris, its luminescent robes torn and stained with silver blood, was the Supreme Representative. The godlike aura was entirely gone, replaced by the frail, trembling reality of a broken creature. It clawed its way to the edge of the protective circle, its pupil-less eyes wide with a horrific new emotion, genuine terror, lacking the strength or the network connection to project its thoughts telepathically. The Ascendancy leader was forced to use its biological vocal cords for the very first time in over 2,000 years. The voice was raspy, weak, and utterly desperate. "Stop this," the Supreme Representative begged, collapsing to its knees and pressing its forehead against the shattered glass floor. "I concede. We concede. You are incinerating our minds. You are tearing down the pillars of our entire civilization. I beg of you, human, turn off your weapon. End the broadcast." Bennett looked down at the kneeling tyrant. He did not show malice or triumph, only a profound, heavy pity. He reached down and gently rested his hand on the lid of the open steel briefcase. "You still do not understand," Bennett replied, his voice calm and carrying perfectly across the ruined chamber. "You spent all this time searching for a highly complex algorithmic virus. You believed we weaponized our military archives, our nuclear codes, or the collective trauma of our greatest wars to overload your systems. But that is not what is playing on this turntable." Bennett gestured gracefully toward the spinning crystal vinyl. "We did not build a cybernetic weapon," he continued, the philosophical weight of his words silencing the surrounding crowd. "We simply recorded the fundamental rhythm of our existence. What you are hearing, what is currently tearing your perfect, frictionless quantum architecture apart, is just a single, unedited recording of a human heartbeat, amplified to a quantum frequency by our orbital station. Yes, but entirely pure and unaltered. Your empire is not falling to a weapon of mass destruction. It is collapsing because your sterile perfection cannot withstand the sheer, chaotic force of a creature that simply wants to live." The revelation struck the Ascendancy leader with the force of a physical blow. They were not being destroyed by human hatred, but by human vitality. The rhythmic, unpredictable thumping of a biological heart was the ultimate poison to a system built on absolute, unchanging silence. A sudden, sharp spike in the feedback loop caused the Supreme Representative to scream in raw agony. The central node beneath them was critically failing, threatening to drag the minds of every networked Luminar elite down into the dark abyss of brain death. There was only one terrible, unthinkable choice left if they wanted to physically survive. "Sever it!" the Supreme Representative shrieked to the surviving elites cowering in the ruins. "Tear them out!" In a display of sheer, gruesome desperation, the leaders of the galaxy reached behind their own heads. With agonizing shrieks, they dug their elongated fingers into their own flesh and violently ripped the metallic cognitive parasites straight from their spines. Silver blood sprayed across the crystal shards. The moment the implants disconnected, the remaining quantum tethers of the resonance grid snapped entirely. The oppressive, invisible weight that had smothered the galaxy instantly vanished. Across thousands of star systems, on countless mining colonies, agricultural worlds, and industrial spheres, the network went completely dark. Billions of enslaved minds took their first unburdened breath in millennia. The galaxy was free, liberated in a single, violently beautiful moment. For the Luminar elites, the sudden isolation was a fate worse than death. Stripped of their collective consciousness, they were instantly reduced to singular, terrifyingly lonely mortal beings, shivering in the ruins of their own arrogance. Their godhood was permanently gone. Bennett calmly reached into the briefcase and lifted the diamond-tipped stylus. The crystal record stopped spinning. The massive orbital amplifier above the planet powered down, folding its solar sails and retreating into the cold dark. Closing the heavy steel lid with a satisfying mechanical clack, Bennett reached into his breast pocket. He withdrew a single piece of standard, pressed paper, and dropped it onto the cracked table that had been meant for humanity's surrender. It was the new peace treaty. It contained only one sentence, written in plain ink. The universe belongs to the free will of every living thing. Bennett picked up his briefcase, turned his back on the weeping, mortal remnants of the alien gods, and walked slowly through the parted sea of liberated beings. Humanity did not stay to conquer. They quietly boarded their lone vessel and slipped back into the chaotic, vibrant space of their own solar system. They left behind a newly freed galaxy that would forever honor them, marking the fatal, irreversible mistake of an empire that arrogantly tried to tame a species born from the beautiful chaos of a beating heart. Thank you so much to all the wonderful listeners of Sci-Fi Stories for staying with us until the very end of this journey. We truly appreciate your time and would love to know where you are listening from. So please let us know in the comments. As we mentioned earlier, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, leaving us entirely without an operating budget. If you found today's story entertaining and meaningful, please consider supporting our channel with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment below. Your generous contribution directly pays our dedicated writers and staff, helping them feed their families and allowing us to keep creating more amazing stories for you. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next adventure.